Welcome to the Pocket. I'm your host, Scooter, and here for you guys today. I'm going to be presenting my top 5 running backs in this year's NFL draft class. Now, this is a video I've been very excited to make ever since I started this channel, and what a class to start it off with. This is an amazing draft class, and I can't wait to see where these guys land. And I'm going to be looking forward to also doing a best landing spots fantasy football wise for these running backs before the draft happens. So keep an eye out for that over the coming weeks. But let's talk about this year's class and how I rank these guys. So after last year's, debacle with the running back market being at a sort of an all-time low, couple really good running backs, Jacobs, Henry, and Saquon, moved on to better teams and proved their worth just in time for this year's draft class. So maybe we see some overcorrecting by some teams, maybe 4 guys plus going in the top 50, maybe 2 or 3 going in the top 25. But if you ask me, I wouldn't even say it's overcorrecting. I think the running back position has been devalued too much over the years, and I can't wait to see these 5 guys prove my point. So to start things off, we're going to kick it off with my number 1 guy on the list, because there's no point in trying to surprise you guys. If you know anything about the college football landscape this year, you would know that the number 1 running back in this year's draft class is Ashton Jeanty out of Boise State. Who is my pro comparison for him? MJD on roids. Now, there is a lot of comparisons to Ashton Jeanty that I've heard. I've heard Marshawn Lynch as a bigger, more powerful running back. I've heard LaDainian Tomlinson for his versatility and how you can use him at any spot in the field. And then I've heard Barry Sanders for, sort of his shorter stature. He's listed at 5'8.5". So that's definitely not the tallest back, but that really helps out sometimes in breaking tackles. It's hard to get a guy that's low to the ground like that, especially when they're so strong and they're so fast. I almost forgot to elaborate a little bit more on the MJD comparison. MJD comparison, he's a little bit taller. He's got longer legs. MJD's legs were like really short. Obviously, he was 5'7", I'm pretty sure. So, quite a bit shorter than Jeanty, but it's a very similar thing where he's low to the ground, but he's so fast and he's so compact and strong. It's so hard to bring a guy like that to the ground, especially when they get a full head of steam. Worst part is they're quick. They have good acceleration. So it's like they're never slowing down. Every play that I saw from Jeanty, that was one of these highlights. This dude he never stopped going forward or sideways to gain leverage towards the outside. This dude is always moving in the right direction is the best way to describe it. And I feel like dudes like MJD, they were always able to continuously fall forward and slip through tackles and keep moving while they're doing it, to never giving up and slipping out of seemingly impossible tackles. So that's where the comparison comes from. For me, like I said, there were other comparisons to guys like Beast Mode and Barry Sanders LT, but I just think he's the most similar to me to MJD. So how I would describe him is he truly is just a superhero. There's just something different about the way he is built. He is so strong the way that he runs. I can't wait to see how it translates to the NFL too, because typically when you get excited about guys coming out of the draft, they got this speed and power profile, typically packed into like a 220 pound frame, at least 5'10", right, where they can sort of do it all. But Jeanty is that powerful and he is that fast, but he's in this more compact frame, which makes him almost impossible to tackle. I mean, he looks that fast in his acceleration where he's like, the top backs in the league who are burners, like Saquon, like JT. He might not quite be there, but that's how it looks to me because of how quick his acceleration is. And I would also like to say, like I said, he is super strong, but it's not just that he's, avoiding this all based off athleticism. It's that the way he prepares for tackles coming from safeties, coming from linebackers, it's like he knows where everyone is at every point, at every second during the play, because he is ready to change his angle, right, to screw up whatever pursuit that they're taking on to him and, potentially break the tackle or just straight up get away from them, right? Maybe bait them into, coming inside towards the, line of scrimmage, front 7 area, and then bouncing it outside, whatever it may be. He is very, very aware of his surroundings and he's got great vision, and it's through the entire play, right? It's one thing to have the vision to pick the right hole. It's the next thing to know the tree branch of possibilities of which hole you're going to pick and then what to do next, right? Who is going to be coming to tackle you after that? Ashton Jeanty already knows. So I've kind of gushed a little bit about how good he is, but let's get into his stats. And as I stated, he played at Boise State for 3 seasons, in his first year, he played 14 games, 821 rushing yards on 156 carries, so not the full workload, but 7 touchdowns and 5.3 yards per carry, so that's very good. He also contributed in the receiving game, 14 receptions, 155, and no touchdowns. But you could see how things progressed throughout his career: 1,300 yards and 4 touchdowns on the ground. And in this season, it wasn't his most carries on the ground, but he got 43 receptions, which was pretty crazy, for almost 600 yards and 5 touchdowns. So pretty remarkable ability to, be used on the ground and in the passing game. Not much else you could ask for in terms of versatility. And then obviously his last season, 2,600 yards, 29 touchdowns, and only 23 receptions for 138 receiving yards. But, who cares? He had 2,600 rushing yards and 30 touchdowns in total. So what a remarkable season. Crazy that he was in the same year as Travis Hunter, so he couldn't win the Heisman. But that is the type of season he had, that in almost any other year, he would have been considered like an undisputed Heisman. He truly is that incredible. So back to Jeanty as a player. When he's screwing up those second level players on their pursuit angles and stuff like that, it doesn't just stop there. He drops his hips like a wrestler preparing for a throw every time he's about to get tackled. Watch very slowly in his highlights when the guy as soon as their hands touch him, he's still sprinting forward, but his hips drop low to the ground. That's so they can swing around top of him, slip off of him easier because he's already short, right? And when you drop your hips, you get more control of your body, relative to the ground. You're closer to it. So that's something that I noticed quite significantly about what he does. His legs are always moving. There's not a wasted step either. Like I said, it seems like, not only is he a great athlete, but all of this is not like some accident, him breaking these tackles, right? He is setting all of this up, which I think is a good sign that he's going to be able to translate it to the NFL, because some people might be worried about the size. I personally am not, based on what we saw from him. He accelerates through multiple cuts, especially when he's cutting back on maybe a zone run and it's all flush to the right-hand side. He'll do 1 cut, 2 cut, and he'll be getting faster as he does so, which is really, really hard thing to do as an athlete. You would imagine, compared to your average person, your average NFL player is doing that very easily compared to them. But to do that at an above average level compared to the relative athletes like the linebackers and the secondary players, to do it faster than them is just insane. It's inhuman. That's why I call him a superhero. What's his scheme fit? Well, to me, he defies the below 215 can't workhorse allegations that, I have said before, and other people. I never said it was impossible. He's obviously a clear example that, you don't truly have to be, that size of 5'9", 215 at least to be a workhorse, meaning you can also handle the power element. Some guys are just different, like Jeanty, and they can manage to handle it. So really excited to see how high he gets selected in the draft. But for me, it's easy. I'm not going to get cute here and try to put someone else. Ashton Jeanty is your RB1. Up next at number 2, and this is where the discussion starts, because spoiler alert, not only 2 through 5 was very difficult for me to decide, but the 5 spot itself and a couple of the honorable mentions that I will be having for you guys at the end of the show, they were competing for me. I was having trouble who to put at 5. So this is very close. There's not a steep drop off. These guys are all very good too, but they're just not on Jeanty's level, but they're very close to each other. They're good at different things. But without further ado, let's get into my number 2 back, Omarion Hampton. He went to North Carolina, and he's 6 foot, 221 pounds. And my pro comp for him is DeMarco Murray. Now, why is that? Because although he is very fluid and agile, what really stuck out to me is when he got to the second level, the amount of 1 cut, sprint upfield, 1 cut, sprint upfield, that he would just never, fully not that he would never fully commit to, trying to take it to the house, but I think he has a really good gauge of when he can do that. And he's very quick, and very soon that once he knows I'm not going to beat this guy, he's immediately cutting back because he knows he has potential to get more yards that way and break tackles, right? Screwing up their angles and stuff like that, which is something DeMarco Murray would do, break the tackles of dudes in the second level. And so that's where that comparison comes from. Also, the size, DeMarco Murray, very comparable, about 6 foot, 217, I believe he came in at the combine, but actually a little stronger than Omarion Hampton. But either way, I think the comparison still stands very closely. They both had the speed, the strength, and enough agility and acceleration. Although I think Hampton might be a little bit more agile and less stiff than DeMarco Murray. But right after watching Ashton Jeanty, I was expecting, as I stated just a second ago, this huge drop off, and there was like a slight drop off, but I just couldn't help but think to myself, like, oh my God, this guy's really good too, but in a different way. I mean, his tackle breaking ability definitely depends more on having some speed built up. And although it does work like that for Jeanty just seemingly gets to that speed way quicker than these other guys, or retains that speed after contact more than anyone I've ever seen. I'm sure there's some Hall of Famers and some perennial All Pros who have been on his level of it, but in recent memory, I haven't seen quite as many people be able to keep their legs moving and forward momentum quite like Ashton Jeanty. But Omarion Hampton, he still is really hard to take down in the open field past the second level, but he also does have the size to burst through some arm tackles from some defensive linemen, which is really, really helpful. And it's something that helps you become more than an outside zone back, right? Because those outside zone guys who are big and powerful, they're only really best used once they have that full head of steam going to the outside, which Hampton does need sometimes for outside zone, but for inside zone, he can also adapt and be versatile with the good vision, the patience and agility to find the right gap and slip through. Hopefully one that he can burst through, right, so he can get to the second level, but if need be, he can grind it down up the middle. He refuses to allow defenders to stay square with him if there's any amount of separation in the second level. This is something I said earlier, the one cut sprint. He'll create that extra yard of separation to the left or right because he knows he can make more out of it, and he'll cut it up the field and bank that whoever's coming from the inside of the field where he's cutting back into, that he's just going to break that tackle, and he runs viciously through those cuts and he commits to them. Let's take a look at his stats for a little bit. At North Carolina as a freshman, he didn't get the full workload, only 88 carries, 400 rushing yards, though, and 6 touchdowns on a 4.6 average is pretty good. Had very limited work in the receiving game, but he did catch a touchdown. Sophomore year, though, and senior year, wow. 13 and 12 games, 1,500 yards and 1,600 yards, 15 touchdowns in both years, and 5.9 yards per carry in both of those seasons. He increased his role in the receiving game and his efficiency over those 2 seasons. And it's pretty clear that every year he's gotten better, although he was very consistent from the sophomore to senior season. You could see through the work in the receiving game, more carries on the ground and retaining that yards per carry. Just very, very impressive stats. As we talked about with the combine, 4.46. Ashton Jeanty didn't go into the combine, but Omarion Hampton did to show off his athleticism. Ran a 4.46, 18 reps on the bench. I've seen dudes have better pairings of the 40 and the bench press, but that's not all there is to it, right? That's pretty much just saying your top speed, right? When you've gotten through the line of scrimmage and you're pretty much just racing towards the end zone. That's not really indicative of most of what you're doing as a running back, but the bench press, you like to typically see that closer to maybe like a 22 or something like that for a real strong power running. But it shows more than enough that, especially at his size and at that speed, that's a great combination for strength. In the 20-yard shuttle, 4.4, broad jump 10 foot 10 inches, vertical jump 38 inches, which is pretty crazy. And then the 10-yard split, which is the first 10 yards, and the 41.54. So those are a lot more of your agility and acceleration stats, and those paired up very well compared to most people. He did do almost all the drills in the combine, so it kind of tanks his athleticism score a little bit because some dudes only do a couple of them, and if they didn't do some of the other drills, it does nothing to their score. So props to him for doing almost the whole combine because you really appreciate to see it. But let's go back and continue to reflect on who he is as a player. I love how I keep saying, but he refuses to stop dipping in and dipping out and consistently climbing and baiting defenders vertically until they sort of, you know, charge at him while they're squared up, and then he'll go ahead and dip out. It's actually something you'll even learn in high school as a runner, but to actually be able to apply it at the college level, at the, you know, level of success that he does in consistency and discipline, it's very impressive. So I really, really love that. It seems like I said, he knows when he's beat and he needs to just take off, and he knows when he has to cut back. If I had a hole in my roster at running back, this is the next guy I would pick after Jeanty. Like if I just had this gaping hole and I didn't have a third down back, I didn't have a power back, no goal line back, none of that stuff. Omarion Hampton can perform all of those roles for you. His running style is balanced. The versatility is key. You saw in the receiving game developing there. And he can adapt to any game plan you have week to week. You might want to attack teams in different ways with your running back, whether it's the running scheme or you want to open them up more in the receiving game to expose a linebacker in coverage. You can do so much with him. So I'm not doing like best fits in this video, but a team like the Denver Broncos, I have him most likely going there in my mock draft. Spoiler alert, but it's just what they need, right? They need someone who can carry, you know, the third down role, the early down role. You don't want to draft like another collection of role players like they have right now. If you were going to make an upgrade at running back, go get a workhorse. So what's the scheme for him? Well, he can do it all, just like Ashton Jeanty. So that is your number 2 running back, Omarion Hampton. Up next at number 3, we have the last guy on the thumbnail, and that is Quinshon Judkins out of Ohio State. My pro comparison for him is Melvin Gordon. Why? Well, it's a similar sort of one-cut style where, you know, I had Hampton as DeMarco Murray, even though Quinshon Judkins you might view as a bit more of the power and aggressive runner. Melvin Gordon was aggressive too, and he was definitely trying to hit those home runs like Judkins. Whereas I think Hampton was a bit more patient, always trying to cut back and stuff. And Melvin Gordon also loves to do something that Quinshon Judkins has shown he loves to do. Stiff arm. He loves to stiff arm people. It's a little bit less about the vision with Gordon and Judkins. It's a bit more about get away from me, and I'm going to run past you after I've made my one cut and I've decided on that. So that's my pro comparison for him. So let's get into the stats. His first 2 years were actually at Ole Miss as a freshman and sophomore. He played 13 games both of those seasons, and as a freshman, he had over 1,500, almost 1,600 yards, 5.7 yards per carry, and 16 touchdowns in the SEC, which is pretty crazy, especially because he wasn't at Ohio State when he did that. He was at Ole Miss. 15 receptions, 132. He didn't really change all that much in the receiving game throughout his career, but he goes in his second year at Ole Miss. You know, the team isn't as good. 1,200 rushing yards, just about rounding up. 15 touchdowns still. So pretty reliable on the goal line, but that's just in college. In his final year at Ohio State, almost 1,100 yards, 14 touchdowns. So we've seen a lot of consistency about who he is. Looking at his combine measurables, he ranks as the second best athlete, but this is what I was talking about, where he didn't do the bench press or the 20-yard shuttle. So that's not contributing to his score. Who knows what he would have done in these two things? Omarion Hampton got 18 reps. So there is that. So I'm going to say him and Hampton are very similar athletes, and I'm going to say that Judkins is slightly more explosive. You see that in the broad jump, 11 feet, and the vertical. But I'm going to say Hampton is a bit more fluid, a bit more agile, but maybe Judkins, yeah, he's got the explosive acceleration on his side. And you could also deduce based on the fact that Judkins did not do the bench press, maybe they weren't confident in his bench press ability. So perhaps Hampton is also a little bit stronger as well in totality. But Quinshon Judkins is a nasty runner. Do not get it twisted. He initiates contact. And like I said, he really loves the stiff arm. And I love to see it. I love to see a good old stiff arm. But he's just as nasty in pass pro too. Will make your linebackers think twice when they're blitzing. It's not like he's perfect and he always executes the assignment. But when he does land the blocks, like I said, he's going to make those linebackers think twice. He's a nasty, vicious player. Very similar to Hampton, but I think he's just a bit more stiff. Like I said, he's got the acceleration, but I don't think the agility is quite the same. And perhaps it's because he's always braced for contact, that he quite literally is more stiff than Hampton, because Hampton's always looking for the lanes, But Judkins, he sees the lanes as partially overlapping with the opposing team, right? Because he's saying I can run through them or stiff arm that guy. So that is a lane to me. Well, Quinshon Judkins, you are a one cut back. You are still versatile. You have shown that you can work in the receiving game, but I think his best fit is an outside zone scheme like a Kyle Shanahan 49ers team, the Green Bay Packers, teams that run that sort of offense. They're going to be able to use a guy like this to create some explosive plays on the outside zone. Like I said, through between the tackles, he can be good, but it's about the same as Hampton. But the explosive ability that he is best at, that is something you want in outside zone, not as much in a consistent inside zone type of scheme. So that is my analysis on my number 3 running back, Quinshon Judkins out of Ohio State. Up next, we have a guy that I debated so heavily, putting anywhere from this spot all the way up to 2. I really did. I really did consider it, but I just had to keep him down here because of the scheme fit and versatility. But Cam Skattebo is my number 4 running back. And my pro comparison for him is Marshawn Lynch. Yes, I'm doing it. He's just going to give you everything he's got until you quit. Not to mention the measurables are pretty similar as well. You could see Cam Skattebo, 5'9.5", 219. I believe Marshawn Lynch was about 210, 215 at the combine, 5'10", 215. But he looked like he played a little bit more at 220 anyway. But very similar, and it's the play style for me. Just like MJD and Ashton Jeanty, it's the play style here where you just see, the arms flailing out to the side as he throws his body around into these defenders, bouncing off dudes and refusing to go down. This dude is just an animal. And this comparison is not unoriginal to me. It is just true. This dude is my favorite type of player. Beast Mode was my favorite type of player growing up. They just ran different, and I know it when I see it. This dude is just an and this is one of the reasons why I think he's one of the safest picks at running back. Not that I have really any true doubts about the dudes ahead of him. They just have more potential upside. But if I just wanted, a running, I just said we need to get better at the running back for him. Draft Cam Skattebo, wherever, if it's like late 3rd, I don't know, maybe early 3rd. You don't know when these guys are going to go. As I mentioned earlier in the video, running backs might get valued higher in this year's draft class, especially with how good this one is. Cam Skattebo's stats, pretty sure I missed these going back to cover them. Junior and senior year, so did not play freshman, sophomore year. Still trying to figure out what happened there. But anyway, he was not the full-time starter his first year. He only got 164 carries, but he did have 4.8 yards per carry, 9 touchdowns, almost 800 rushing yards. And as I mentioned before, he had work in the receiving game, 24 receptions, almost 300 receiving yards, and a touchdown. And now his senior season is where it gets really crazy. Obviously, Arizona State had a great season, and this was a big reason why. Almost 300 carries on the ground, 1,700 rushing yards, and 21 touchdowns. 605 receiving yards, 45 receptions, and 3 touchdowns. That's 2,300 scrimmage yards and 24 touchdowns. Holy smokes. What a season by Cam Skattebo. And there were games where he put the team completely on his back, and it was awesome to see him help in more ways than the ground game. So he runs like his life depends on it. We've established this, and that's just really hard to replace. It makes him a safe pick. But what are some other things that he does? Well, he uses his pullers really, really well. As they're moving, through the blocked up scheme, he'll keep his hand on their back, keep his eyes in front of him, see, where are these linebackers committing. And that's just something that, you could run past those dudes and maybe guarantee yourself 8 yards. But sometimes when you set that stuff up and you get a bunch of dudes crashing on one lineman, it really sets up a much bigger play, bouncing it away from that. And Cam Skattebo is very aware of that. And so you're already having trouble tackling him. He makes your job even harder by staying behind the big mollies, right? And so you love to see that. What's really surprising too, and this is the most surprising thing to me, this is why I started thinking about putting him at 2, is how reliable he is at receiver. I mean, don't get me wrong. He's made a lot of really difficult catches that he would end up like falling down during, which is fine. He still caught it. But what's scary is in the NFL, he's going to be able to get up and keep running. And you just know he's going to pop up so fast because he's going to secure the catch. You can be like, fall to the ground if he has to, but he's going to pop up and he's going to look for someone to run over or stiff arm immediately. And I just love to see that out of his game because typically guys like this, they get pinned as just pure power backs. But Cam Skattebo made a lot of really impressive plays in the receiving game. I think it shows his dedication to the game and how he knows he needs to be able to do more than just run the ball. And he's proved that he can do it. So, I mean, it's like I said, between Skattebo, Quinshon, and Omarion Hampton, it's really splitting hairs between these three guys. I honestly don't think their value should be too different. But the one thing that actually convinced me that he probably should be down here was the same reason Quinshon was below Hampton, is that even though he has shown that ability in the receiving game and actually quite a clutch ability for it, and he can play on third downs. It's just like his actual running style is best made for power running schemes. I mean, he can, run like zone like these other guys, but it's just like if you want to get the most out of him, you're going to have to be running a power running scheme for the obvious reasons of using the pullers, right? Obviously, he's a power back, so he's going to, get you those consistent 4 or 5 yard runs. Whereas if you run inside zone and, maybe there's no pullers, you could run duo, but it's just not quite as effective as, the power running scheme. So although it's really close, and like I said, I don't think their value should be all that different, I'm still going to put him here at 4. But like I said, super excited to see where Cam Skattebo goes. And finally, at number 5, as I mentioned, I had a lot of trouble picking a guy for this number 5 spot, which is why I'll have a quick, brief honorable mention section at the end. But I did end up going with Iowa's Kaleb Johnson. Kaleb Johnson's pro comp for me is Todd Gurley. Now, of course, all of these pro comps are like, this is Todd Gurley in his prime. This is assuming Kaleb Johnson hits. This is who they could be. And that is how I feel about Kaleb Johnson. He's like a freight train. He's got long, powerful legs that you can't get a hold of when he's in a sprint. And that's just like Todd. I mean, when he gets those going through a seam or up the sideline, it may not even matter if you've got the angle to tackle him because you're just going to slip right off of him. I mean, I've always imagined big dudes like this running and trying to tackle him. I would just be afraid of getting their heel kicked into my helmet like it would knock me out or something. They're just so big and strong that it's just impossible to even go into it with confidence that you're going to tackle him. So he's got to build up the speed to break those tackles against those second level guys. And I think there is, some room for improvement through like right up the middle, unlike a guy like Cam Skattebo. Kaleb Johnson compares, I think I would say, more to a guy like Quinshon Judkins. So he did come in to the combine with heavy expectations that he was going to have to prove he's this insane athlete to justify the hype he's getting. But he was listed at 217 during the season, and he came in at 224 during the combine, which would make you think, oh, maybe he's trying to get ready for the bench, profile himself as a power guy, but he didn't do the bench press. So I'm not really sure what happened there. Maybe perhaps a bit mismanaged. Maybe he was dealing with something. I'm not too sure. But he did run the 40 and he ran a 4.57, which disappointed a lot of people. But like I said, he came in heavier, so he's probably much faster than that during the season. Kaleb Johnson's stats at Iowa, his freshman and sophomore year, he was not the full-time starter. Only 150 carries, no more than that in those first 2 seasons, 800 rushing yards and 6 touchdowns. But his second year, even less involved, 117 carries. He had pretty much no work in the receiving game these 2 seasons. But it was his senior year that he went off. 240 carries for 1,500 yards, 6.4 yards per carry. Very impressive. And 21 touchdowns, a lot of which were home runs. He had 22 receptions for almost 200 receiving yards and 2 touchdowns as well. So he did contribute just a little bit in the receiving game. But it's that rushing season that he had that really caught a lot of people's attention. And as I mentioned, there was a lot of home runs here. The 21 touchdowns, like I said, the best work was not at the goal line. And when it comes to that home run ability, at least he might even be better than Quinshon Judkins. It's not reflected in the combine. Neither of them did the bench, so we don't really know who's stronger. They're very similar sizes. But just based off of the film, it just looks like Kaleb Johnson has that knack, especially for going for those home runs, where I would say Quinshon Judkins, although I said he wasn't as versatile as Omarion Hampton, he's certainly more versatile than Kaleb Johnson. Pass pro, his ability in the receiving game is probably better than Kaleb Johnson's. But you never know. These guys are at different schools, different roles, different responsibilities. So you never quite know how these things are going to turn out. But just based off of the potential from this year and the upside that he could be that workhorse size, develop more ability in the receiving game on third down between the tackles. Kaleb Johnson has tremendous upside, and that's why I have him here at 5. For now, his scheme fit is going to be outside zone Shanahan. Same reason as Quinshon Judkins. And I had a lot of trouble choosing for this spot. I really did. So let's just list off the honorable mentions. Starting things off with Devin Neal, 5'11", 213. Not the most impressive combine, but he does everything right. And if you're like, how is someone who doesn't have how is someone with a bad combine a good running back prospect? Doesn't that completely go against your philosophy? Yes, but there are exceptions. How do you explain his 7th in production grade at Kansas with that bad of a combine? This dude must have the 99 ball carrier vision, the 99 vision, and the 99 carrying. This dude does everything right. So you love to have a dude like that on your team. Kind of similar to, I would say, like a bigger Devin Singletary is kind of what I imagine a guy like that being. But Singletary, he had some fumbling issues this year, so maybe someone else. Damian Martinez, 6 foot 217. Thought he was going to be a little bigger than that, but did run a 4.5. If you missed out on Cam Skattebo and you want a power guy, Martinez is your guy. So keep an eye on him in the 4th-ish round, maybe 3rd, depending on how high all these running backs go. Just wanted to point him out. Trevor Etienne, he was probably the closest guy I had to putting at number 5, and I really wanted to do it just because of how good his film looked, and he had a great combine. 5'9", 200 pounds. Not the prototypical size for like a workhorse, but really good athlete. 4'4", 15 reps on the bench at 200 pounds is insane. And then the other combine measurables you can see here. It's just the way he ran. Very similar to Travion Henderson, and honestly, I'm just going to talk about these two guys at the same time. They're very similar. I would say Etienne had a bit more one cut in him than Travion Henderson did, where Henderson was a bit. It's almost like Trevor Etienne is a smaller Quinshon Judkins, and Travion Henderson is a smaller Omarion Hampton. Is the best way I would explain it. Of course, they're both going to be faster and more agile than those two guys I just listed, but if you're the size of Hampton, you can do both, right? But if you're the size of these guys, you just can't be the same level of effective power back. The guys at the top, sure, they can't burn you quite as well as these guys, but with these guys, it's more of an agility thing and acceleration. So I don't know. I thought really, really hard about it. I guess Trevor Etienne is my number 6, but the rest of these guys are in a collection at 7 through 9. So there you have it. That is my top 5 running backs for this year's NFL draft class. I had a lot of fun making this video. I had a lot of fun with a great excuse to watch some college highlights. So that was a good time. Ashton Jeanty is going to be a beast, but so are the rest of these guys. I have a lot of confidence in these 5. I would say Kaleb Johnson is the biggest question mark. Not really sure if he can become that Todd Gurley that I compared him to, but we'll just have to see on draft night where these guys land, because to be completely honest, I think Jeanty will be good wherever he goes and he'll get the volume, but that's really what it's all about. Are you on a great team like the Eagles, and are you going to get a ton of volume, or are you going to be on a bad team? Maybe like the Browns or the Titans, and maybe not get quite as much volume because the coaching staff is dysfunctional or whatever. They don't want to get you hurt for the future, whatever it may be. Situation is definitely most important when you're trying to predict production, talking about fantasy here, for these running backs. So keep an eye on where they land, and keep an eye out for that video I'll have coming out of top best landing spots for running backs for this upcoming fantasy football season. I appreciate you all so much for watching this video, and I hope you enjoyed it. Leave a like and your thoughts in the comments. If you have anything to say, if you would have ordered this list any differently, please let me know. And if you haven't already, please subscribe so you don't miss that video that'll be coming out later this week. I know you guys, some of you out there must love fantasy football as much as I do, which means you're going to want to watch that video. So once again, thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace out.